I want to start off this video by addressing a question that has popped up a lot. Why choose the Battle Wizard over the Pyromancer? This is a very legitimate question. As most if not all of us are well aware, the Pyromancer is an insanely powered class, especially with the beam staff. With the Pyro, you can clear hordes as if they were nothing, you can snipe specials from afar, you can kill bosses at a reasonably fast rate, you can one-shot Chaos Warriors with your ult, and one of the biggest aspects, which not everyone remembers to mention, you can literally stagger everything constantly. So yes, it's perfectly reasonable to ask why choose the Battle Wizard over the Pyromancer. Over a month ago, I wouldn't have chosen the Battle Wizard over the Pyromancer. 80% of my Sienna levels came from playing with the Pyromancer, which, by the way, was the first class I leveled. So, as I and most people would do, foolishly mind you, I would criticize, at the time, the Battle Wizard and even Unchained for being so much worse than the Pyromancer. I'd laugh at their ults and utilities, saying how useless they are by comparison. My logic stemmed from the fact that with the Pyromancer's ult, you can pretty much one-shot anything the game throws at you, aside from bosses of course, and the Battle Wizard's ult wouldn't really kill anything. Then I finally decided to try out the Battle Wizard, and to be honest, I found it pretty frustrating, especially having come from other classes that destroy everything in their way, such as the Bounty Hunter, Huntsman, and Pyromancer. I felt I wasn't in control. The Fireball staff, using your charged attack, shoots these large fireballs that cover so much of the screen that you don't really see what you're killing, or if anything is dying. Now, the grave mistake I was making was trying to emulate the Pyromancer playstyle. It's understandable since all of Sienna classes are predominantly ranged. Yes, even with the Unchained, most of your kills are going to be ranged. Like I said, the Pyromancer was the first class I leveled. I invested very heavily into that class, especially with the beam staff. Our brains are generally wired to become accustomed and comfortable with something, therefore we tend to automatically reject anything that is different. That, by the way, applies to virtually everything in life, but that's an entirely separate and intricate subject that would be more appropriately represented in a National Geographic episode. This, for me, is one of the biggest issues with the Pyromancer. And this goes equally for the Falchion, Halberd, Beamstaff, Dual Daggers, and so on. When you become so accustomed to playing with something that is so powerful, you feel like you're downgrading yourself when you play with anything else. It's difficult to change your habits when those habits are generally better than others. This is why you see so many people playing with Pyro plus Beamstaff, Bounty Hunter plus Crossbow, Shade plus Dual Daggers, etc. This is why in my previous DLC Thoughts video, I asked Fat Shark to buff a couple of weapons that have previously been ignored, so that they're equally or more powerful than the weapons I've just mentioned. I want to be forced to play with other weapons. I want everyone to experiment with other weapons, and the only way of forcing people to do this is by buffing ignored weapons to those levels. Anyway, I kept trying and pushing to enjoy playing with the Battle Wizard, and honestly I wasn't really getting anywhere. I knew that I had to insist. I had to rewire my brain. So I decided that if I kept playing with this class, eventually I'd see the light. I played around with the breakpoints, weapon traits, positioning, potions, you name it. I knew that the optimal combination was hidden somewhere in there. The issue is that I started playing with the Battle Wizard with the same setup as the Pyromancer. Beam staff, dagger, same properties, even same traits. It just wasn't working out. Although, to be perfectly honest, I knew it wasn't going to work out entirely, but I wanted to test it regardless. So I finally decided to start from scratch. I changed to the Fireball staff and the maze, changed my properties and trait, and after investing enough hours, I finally saw the light. And holy guacamole, I am so happy I insisted on playing this class. I said I didn't feel like I was in control at the beginning of this video. This class is all about control. You can quite literally do the work of a tank and insane damage dealer all at the same time. You can control how the game pans out, you can lead your team with this class. Not only are you insanely effective in the front line, but you're effective from anywhere. 1 second you can be positioned behind your team, jumping and spamming fireballs at hordes. Another you can be charging an entire patrol, staggering them and butchering everything with your mace. You want even more control by sacrificing some DPS? No problem, use the conflagration stuff. Some of you may have watched the Battle Wizard videos I've uploaded. Just to be clear, you may be motivated to play the class after watching those videos or this guide. It happens to me as well. I watch a video of someone playing well with a certain class and weapon, and I jump in straight away to do the same just to be severely disappointed. The reality is that that person playing so well with that class and weapon has invested dozens, if not hundreds of hours to get to that level. My point is, classes such as the Battle Wizard require many hours of practice to achieve a certain level of effectiveness. Like everything in life, if you want to become good at something, you need to invest the hours and effort. So just because you watch a guide such as this one, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to play exactly the same way. You can copy and paste talents, traits, properties, and gear, but you cannot copy and pace experience. This guide, or any other guide for that matter, should be seen as a stepping stone. Guides help you skip the testing that is required when choosing weapons, traits, properties, etc. They should help you jump straight into the gaining experience phase. So what is my message to all of you watching? Well, it doesn't matter if there's a class or weapon you hate. Try it. Like, a lot. Some people will insist on certain classes and weapons being trash. However, they might just be trash to them and not to you. Invest the hours, and only then should you pass judgment. And finally, going back to the original question, why Battle Wizard over the Pyromancer? The Pyromancer is absolutely amazing from a distance, especially if you have a teammate covering you. The Battle Wizard, on the other hand, is fantastic from a distance and fantastic at melee. You are capable of controlling every scenario. You could say that the Battle Wizard is more versatile overall. You may not do as much DPS as a Pyromancer with a beam staff, but you won't be far off, and you'll control the match much more effectively. Okay, so moving on to talents. As you can see, your passive ability is Tranquility. Avoiding damage and not casting spells for 8 seconds automatically ventilates overcharge. It might not sound great because by itself it's not really that good. However, when you start combining it with certain talents, it's quite good. Your career skill or ult is Firewalk. Sienna teleports forward, leaving a blanket of fire in her wake that lingers for 6 seconds. I mean, it doesn't do very good damage, not gonna lie, but the whole point of this career skill is to crowd control, which is where the Battle Wizard shines. Okay, so for tier 1 talents, generally I tend to go with Cauterize Wounds since it directly affects your temp health gain, which is pretty awesome. You throw a charged fireball at a horde and you watch your temp health fly through the roof. It stacks with Boon of Shalia as your necklace trait, so you're effectively gaining 60% additional health, which is pretty bonkers, I have to say. Do you really need it? No, not really. What this stacking health does help you do much more is trade more blows with mobs. In other words, you can take more risks when swinging your melee weapon or firing your staff. You don't have to be as preoccupied with getting hit more often, since you gain back that health so quickly. Fueled by fire, it's not the ideal option since you won't be carrying out many push attacks, if any, especially with the mace. With the dagger, it's a different story because you will be doing a lot of push attacks, especially for movement purposes. And if you're going with a tier 3 talent, Burning Vigor, then you basically have infinite shields, so one more won't really be an added value. As for Voracious Conjuring, this won't really affect you if you're using the Fireball staff, but it can be decent if you're going with either the Conflagration staff or the Flamestorm staff, especially when combined with a tier 3 talent, Rechannel. I've tried all of these combinations out, and indeed you do charge significantly faster when your passive ability is up. So moving on to tier 2 talents, I'm not gonna beat around the bush and just say that World of Flame is amazing. Like I mentioned during the first part of this video, you're going to feel so powerful at melee, it's just worth taking this talent over the other two. This affects both melee and ranged weapons since the talent affects your positioning. Although let's be realistic, mobs have to be virtually stuck to you in order to gain the buff, so most of the time you'll find yourself wielding your melee weapon when taking advantage of this talent. Molten Skin is only worth taking if you're doing true solo runs, and let's be honest, how many people invest the time and effort into true solo runs? Yeah, a handful. Flicker Form, not practical to use. You're going to be destroying everything in your path, whether it be your ranged or melee weapons, so it's not really worth taking, to be honest. For tier 3 talents, this one mostly depends on what ranged weapon you're running. The first two are useful, and Centered is probably the least useful talent of the three, at least for me. You're going to be manually venting the majority of the time, so you're never really going to be too concerned with depending on your passive ability to vent. If you want to go 100% block cost reduction, then Burning Vigor is the obvious way to go. Although you do have to add the block cost reduction property, ideally maxed out at 30%, to your melee weapon as well as your necklace. If you have both a red weapon and necklace, this is clearly very easy to achieve. Rechannel is a pretty good option if you're running Conflagration staff or Flamestorm staff, and it synergizes quite well with the tier 1 talent I mentioned earlier, Voracious Conjuring. And as for Centered, the thing is, if you're spamming your staff significantly, and you will, then you'll have to rely on venting manually most of the time, in any case. If you find yourself at melee a lot, then you won't care much for your overcharge levels. It's one of those talents that sounds good on paper, but in practice you'll never really depend on. So moving on to tier 4 talents, unlike the resourceful sharpshooter Pyromancer build and playstyle, which depends heavily on crits to reduce your ult cooldown, the Battle Wizard will be killing at a faster pace. Therefore, Soul Snare is the obvious choice. Blazing Harvest only has utility if you're running a mod such as Mythical Vanguard where every special is replaced by a boss. You'll be killing a lot of bosses, so it's worth taking in that situation. Normally, however, you can get anywhere from 0 to a couple or maybe even 3 bosses depending on the map. Not worth taking for general use. And finally, for tier 5 talents, Volan's Quickening is a decent choice. However, Burnout will give you more control over every scenario that is presented before you. For example, if you get a boss, you will spam your fireball staff, the boss will most likely turn to you, and by the time the boss gets to you, you'll be at near max overcharge. You use your ult, staggering the boss and simultaneously venting all of your overheat, and you can continue spamming until you inevitably have to change to your melee weapon to block. With a concentration potion, the process I've just detailed is multiplied by a factor of 5-ish. In other words, you can nuke and stagger the boss until it's pretty much dead. No doubt in my mind, Burnout is the way to go. As for weapons, moving on to melee, my first choice for melee without a doubt is the mace. It does great damage versus armored, and you can spam it quite quickly if you solely use the primary attack at all times. As a visual representation, you want to attack either with light or heavy, then block immediately after. So heavy, block, light, block. In other words, attack, block, rinse and repeat. Generally aiming for the mob's head, which is of course where you'll do the most damage. In fact, it's usually better to spam light first attack, since even though you technically do less damage than your charge first attack, you do damage at a faster rate. You'll also have more control over your blocking since the heavy attack animation is longer. For properties, if you're going with 100% block cost reduction, then you have no choice but to roll that. The other property is really up to you. You're not achieving tremendous breakpoints, so anything from crit chance to power versus Skaven or chaos is fine. As for the trait, I've gone with Swift Slaying, since most of the other traits aren't as effective and it affects your overall DPS versus everything. Choosing parry is somewhat overkill since you're already running 100% block cost reduction. Of course, there is a place for it if you want to change from your ranged weapon to your melee weapon very quickly in order to block in the last instance. As for Resourceful Combatant, the mace is just too slow and impractical for that. Off balance can be a good option to go with since it would synergize quite well with the tier 2 talent World of Flame. The dagger is great if you want to kite mobs or bosses since you have a significantly higher mobility. However, this is pretty circumstantial, so I would always choose the mace over the dagger. Kiting with the dagger can prove to be very useful if, again, you're running a mod such as Mythical Vanguard. In this mob, you'll be facing off against several bosses at the same time, so kiting can be quite crucial. As for the other two melee weapons, the sword and fire sword, at the time of this video's upload, there's no real incentive to go with these, in my opinion. Hopefully this will change down the line. As for ranged, my first choice would be Fireball Staff. People will complain about the friendly fire, no doubt. You'll need to position yourself correctly. You won't feel as much in control as you do with the beam staff, but all of that will change once you gain enough experience. For properties, I've gone with Power vs Chaos and Power vs Armored on staff, and Power vs Chaos, Power vs Skaven on the charm. For the trait, Barrage is the way to go. Your damage stacks against everything, and on bosses it's a pure delight. All of this will allow you to reach certain breakpoints such as 2-shotting mobs with 2 quick charged attacks or 1 fully charged attack followed by a normal attack. The following mobs require charged attacks to take down efficiently: Storm Vermin, Warp Fire Throwers, Rattling Gunners, Pack Masters, and bosses. Everything else you want to use your normal left click attack. Remember that Maulers, aka Raiders, require that you focus your attacks in the torso area. 3 shots at the torso should be enough, especially if you have a stack or 2 of barrage up. Their head is protected by super armor, the same armor type as Chaos Warriors. Spamming your fireballs at Chaos Warriors is useless, you have to face them head on with your mace. That's fine since you can kill a Chaos Warrior with just a few charged melee attacks. My second choice is the Conflagration Staff. If you're more concerned with controlling every encounter than doing damage to bosses, for example, then this staff is the way to go. You will spend 90% of the match staggering everything. This is generally a good thing, although you will get teammates that complain since they'll have trouble aiming with their ranged weapon and therefore will most likely miss a lot of shots. Another issue is that if you use your charged attack on a horde, you will leave a large circle of fire on the floor. This means you'll have less visibility of the horde mobs, and those horde mobs will begin circling around the fire spot, therefore splitting up the horde. Yeah, your teammates will also complain about this. What's the solution, you may ask? Experience. Knowing when, where, and what to stagger, when to use your charged attack on hordes, and so on. Sorry, there's no easy fix, I'm afraid. Thermal Equalizer is a great trait to go with if you're spam staggering. Barrage is also very good, especially for single target damage, such as elites, specials, and bosses, although your normal left click attack is very powerful in and of itself. For my third choice, I'd go for the Bolt Staff. Excellent against elites, even Chaos Warriors. You can 3-shot a Chaos Warrior with some well-placed charged headshots. It overheats quite a lot, so I'd recommend going with Thermal Equalizer. It's a bit more niche since you ideally want to go for charged headshots in order to be as effective as possible. It's not as effective at horde clearing as the previous staves, but in exchange you have great damage versus the aforementioned mob types. The Flamestorm Staff can be quite effective, especially against large groups of mobs, including elites. A fully charged attack can decimate hordes and put a serious dent in elite patrols. You can potentially cut a Chaos Warrior's health in half with one fully charged attack. What's the problem in my opinion? Charging the Flamestorm Staff and firing it fully takes too long. It has its place and can be fun, but I can't justify it over the other staves. Regarding the Beam Staff, I just don't think it's worth using with the Battle Wizard. I'm not saying it isn't viable, but the Beam Staff synergizes so well with the Pyromancer's ult that it's really only worth using with that class. For the Battle Wizard, the Fireball Staff synergizes beautifully with the ult as well as the Conflagration Staff. For the necklace, I'd go with 20% health along with 30% block cost reduction. Boon of Shalia for the trait goes really well with the tier 1 talent Cauterized Wounds. Of course, Healer's Touch is also a solid option. For the charm, as I mentioned before, I choose Power vs Chaos and Power vs Skaven since it goes well with your melee and ranged weapons. Decanter is fantastic, especially with a strength potion. You can melt bosses quite effectively with those two combinations. If you don't have a strength potion, the second best option is speed potion. And last but not least, for the trinket I'd go with the general use stats, which are curse resistance and crit chance. For the trait, Grenadier or Shrapnel are both great options. Shrapnel will give you that extra DPS boost against bosses, and Grenadier might proc against patrols. I usually go with Grenadier since the Battle Wizard is all about crowd control, so the more grenades you proc, the more you can control any situation. If you're running Mythical Vanguard and going with a kiting build, then movement speed would be a better option over curse resistance, since you wouldn't be picking up Grimoires regardless.